That year, in the radiant capital of Susa of the Persian Empire, a decree was sealed. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, the entire Jewish people across the 127 provinces would be annihilated. No one, not even the king, could revoke an order once it bore the royal signet. Right in the upper palace where power was decided, there existed a secret. The woman whom the whole empire called Queen Esther was in truth a Jewish orphan, her original name Hadassah. She carried a hidden identity, and she was also the last hope to save her people. Esther understood that there was only one path: to dare to appear before the king and plead with him to change their fate. But that path was lined with swords and spears. The iron law declared, whoever entered the king's presence without being summoned must die. Yet in that moment between life and death, Esther drew in a deep breath, pressed her hand to her chest to steady herself, and pushed open the vast golden doors, though she had not been called by the king. To understand why Esther had to stake her life, we must return to the beginning. The city of Susa was not only the center of power, but also a place of luxury beyond imagination. Walls of marble inlaid with gems, long corridors lined with columns carved in relief with lions and eagles, and red carpets stretching from the gates all the way to the throne. King Xerxes reigned there, the one who held power over life and death across a vast land from India to Ethiopia. During a banquet that lasted 6 months, 6 months of overflowing wine and displays of gold and silver, Xerxes, drunk on victory, desired to flaunt also the beauty of Queen Vashti. He commanded, "Bring the queen before me with her crown upon her head, so she may display her beauty before all the guests." But Vashti refused, a refusal that was firm and resolute. Before so many eyes, the king was humiliated. The officials counseled, if she is allowed to disobey, all the women in the empire will despise their husbands. Thus, Vashti was deposed. The queen's throne was empty. And so began a search across all 127 provinces. The most beautiful young women were brought into the royal harem. They went through 12 months of treatments, skin anointed with myrrh, bodies rubbed with oils, and lessons in posture and speech, to prepare for a single appearance before the king. Among these maidens was a quiet face, Hadassah, the orphan girl raised by her cousin Mordecai. Her hair was plain black, her gait unpretentious, but her eyes were bright, pure, and humble. It was that simplicity that made her stand out. On the night of her presentation, Esther wore attire simpler than the other girls. She did not ask for lavish jewels, only what was necessary. When she entered the hall, she bowed her head, and when she lifted it, her gaze met the king's. A moment of silence, and then the king's expression changed. All the other beauties faded into the background. A few days later, Hadassah, now called Esther, was crowned queen. From an unknown girl, she became queen of Persia. But her Jewish identity remained hidden, as Mordecai had advised, and that secret slowly became the lifeblood of the entire story. Mordecai, the one who raised Esther, often sat at the gate of the royal palace. One evening, amid the sound of whistling wind and guards changing shifts, he overheard 2 eunuchs whispering. Bigthan and Teresh were plotting to kill the king. Their hushed words dripped with venom, speaking of a blade hidden in a sleeve and the right moment in the quiet of the night. Mordecai's face turned pale. He hurried to inform Esther, and Esther reported it to the king. The plot was investigated, the crime exposed, and the 2 eunuchs were hanged. The king's life was saved, yet Mordecai was not honored, not rewarded, not even thanked. Only a cold line written in the royal chronicles. On that day, Mordecai reported the plot and saved the king from assassination. This silence seemed meaningless, but it became a piece of destiny, waiting for the right moment to overturn the course of events. Soon after, another figure rose to power, Haman. From the moment he was elevated to the rank of prime minister, he was arrogant and self-satisfied. All the officials in the court, whenever they encountered him, were required to bow and kneel. But there was one man who never did. Mordecai, a Jew who sat constantly at the palace gate. Day after day, Mordecai's steadfast gaze was like a thorn in Haman's heart. His fury did not stop at one man alone. Within him blazed a fire of hatred. To kill only Mordecai is too little. I will erase his entire people from the face of the earth. Haman brooded over his scheme. He knew he could not directly ask the king to kill the Jews. That would be too blunt and likely opposed. Instead, he chose the roundabout path, wrapping his plot in fine words and a pretense of concern for the throne. One day, Haman entered the royal hall. His voice was filled with apparent care and reverence. "Your Majesty, there is a people scattered across the 127 provinces. They are unlike anyone else. They live by their own laws. They do not assimilate. They do not obey your decrees. To let them remain will sooner or later bring rebellion, weakening the kingdom. If it pleases you, let a decree be issued to uproot them completely, to keep the throne secure." Haman paused, then bowed even lower. King Xerxes, at that time placing absolute trust in Haman, had no suspicion. He removed the signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, thereby granting him the power to issue decrees in the king's name. Thus, with only a few cunning words, Haman turned the king into the legal seal for his genocidal scheme. Immediately after, the scribes of the court were summoned. Under the flickering light of oil lamps, they diligently copied the decree in every language to be sent across the vast empire. The royal seal was pressed onto each scroll. On the 13th day of Adar, all Jews, from infants to the elderly, from men to women, were to be killed. Their property would be plundered. When the news spread, the city of Susa trembled. The people were bewildered, unable to understand why such a cruel order had been given. Meanwhile, Haman and the king sat drinking wine, oblivious to the rising storm sweeping across the land. As for Mordecai, when he heard the news, he tore his clothes, clothed himself in sackcloth, scattered ashes on his head, and cried aloud outside the palace gate. His cry was not his alone. It echoed from all 127 provinces, where Jews writhed in terror of extermination. And in the palace, Esther too had received the news. Through a messenger, Mordecai sent word to Esther, "You must go to the king. Plead for our people." Esther trembled as she replied, "To enter without being summoned means death. It has been 30 days since I was last called." Mordecai's response struck like a hammer. "Do not think that being in the palace will let you escape. If you remain silent, deliverance will arise from another place, but you and your family will perish. Who knows if you have come to the throne for such a time as this?" Esther looked out the window, saw the darkness falling over the city, and heard the distant cries. She bit her lip, then sent back her answer, "Gather the Jews and fast for 3 days. I too will fast. After that, I will go to the king. If I perish, I perish." 3 days passed in silence and prayer. On the final night, Esther put on her royal robes. Her hands trembled, but her eyes shone with faith. She walked through the freezing corridor, arriving before the golden doors. Her heartbeat pounded. When the doors opened, the air in the hall seemed to freeze. King Xerxes sat upon his throne, his purple robe flowing down the steps, his piercing eyes fixed straight ahead. His gaze faltered. Before him stood Esther, unsummoned, unauthorized, yet present. The officials murmured. A few guards tightened their grip on their spears. A flash of anger crossed the king's face. His brows furrowed. The corner of his lips quivered. Esther knelt, her hands pressed against her chest, her breath unsteady, her eyes brimming with tears, yet steadfast. The great hall fell into utter silence, broken only by the stifled sob caught in her throat. The king looked at her. His cold gaze softened into surprise, then gentleness. Perhaps he remembered the day he chose her, remembered the clarity of her eyes. Slowly, the golden scepter extended toward her. Esther exhaled, tears streaming down her cheeks. She bowed her head to touch the tip of the scepter. From the border of death, she had crossed into life, yet in her eyes still lingered a glimmer of worry. The true battle had only just begun. When the king asked Esther, "What is it you desire?" "Even half the kingdom will be granted," Esther did not rush. She invited the king and Haman to a banquet of wine. The first banquet passed, and Esther still only smiled. "Please come to a second banquet." That night, the palace was wrapped in silence, yet in the vast chamber, King Xerxes tossed and turned. He could hear the pounding of his own heartbeat, the wind whistling through the cracks of the doors. The sweet wine did not lull him to sleep. In his head echoed Esther's eyes from earlier that day, eyes that seemed to hold something back, as though they longed to speak but restrained themselves. His heart was unsettled, as if pulled taut by an invisible string. "Bring me the chronicles," he commanded. The rustle of parchment filled the air, a monotonous voice reciting into the heavy atmosphere. But then, a name stood out. Mordecai. "This man exposed the plot to assassinate your majesty." The king sat bolt upright, his eyes wide. Was he ever rewarded? "No, your majesty." The restlessness of moments before turned into shame. He, the supreme ruler of Persia, had forgotten the man who had saved his life. The thought burned within him, making him flush, unable to rest. And it was precisely in this uneasy moment that Haman entered, asking permission to hang Mordecai. The king asked, "What do you think should be done for the man the king desires to honor?" Believing the words referred to himself, Haman eagerly listed the royal robe, the king's horse, a procession through the city. The king nodded. "Do all of this for Mordecai." Haman's face went pale, his heart plummeting into an abyss. The next day, he himself had to lead the horse, shouting loudly, "This is the man whom the king delights to honor!" While the people snickered in secret, and Mordecai sat upright, his face calm and composed. Humiliation engulfed Haman, and it was the omen of a coming downfall. The second banquet began. Once more the king asked, "What is it that you desire?" Esther drew in a deep breath, then knelt, her voice choked with emotion. "Grant me my life, O king, and grant my people their lives, for we have been sold to destruction. If it were only to be sold into slavery, I would have remained silent. But now it is annihilation." The king sprang to his feet, his face pale. When Esther pointed at Haman, the entire hall trembled. The officials whispered among themselves, some staring at one another in horror. "The queen is a Jew." In that instant, not only Haman but the whole company of attendants was stunned. The secret that had been hidden so long shattered before the king and the court. Some officials hesitated. Should they continue to revere a queen who bore foreign blood? Esther bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her voice trembled, yet it rang with firmness. "Yes, I am a Jew, but my people, for generations, have only sought to live in peace, and now we stand on the brink of destruction." Esther's hand, trembling, pointed straight. The enemy is Haman. Overwhelmed by the cascade of revelations, the king was enraged. He turned away in fury, his anger burning not only toward Haman, the one who had deceived him into giving his signet ring, turning him into the legal seal of a decree of genocide, but also against himself for having been ensnared in such a scheme. The moment he was exposed, Haman collapsed, his face ashen. He hurriedly crawled toward Esther, clutching at her robe to beg for mercy. But just as the king returned, he saw Haman kneeling close beside Esther, and he roared, "Do you even dare to assault the queen here in the palace itself?" The guards rushed forward and covered Haman's face. Then an official stepped near and whispered, "Your Majesty, he has already prepared a gallows 50 cubits high to hang Mordecai." The king hissed, "Hang him on it instead." The hammer struck, the ropes tightened. Haman was hanged on the very gallows he had built. The whole city of Susa trembled. Yet even though Haman was dead, the decree still stood. The day of death still loomed near. There was no more time. Esther put on her royal robes, fell to her knees before the king, tears streaming down her face, her voice choked. "How can I bear to see disaster fall upon my people? How can I endure watching my kinsmen destroyed?" The king looked at her. His gaze was no longer that of a cold sovereign, but of a man seeing his wife in deepest anguish. He sighed, then nodded. "I cannot revoke a decree once sealed, but I grant you and Mordecai permission to write a new decree in my name." With trembling hands, Mordecai took the pen. New words were written. The Jews in every province are granted the right to assemble, to defend themselves, and to destroy anyone who attacks them. They are permitted to take the property of their enemies as spoil. The new decree was dispatched on the fastest horses. Wherever the letters arrived, fear turned into hope. Wailing gave way to rejoicing. The 13th day of Adar came, but instead of a massacre, the Jews rose up together. The clash of swords, the shouts of battle resounded. In Susa, 800 enemies fell, including Haman's 10 sons. Across the 127 provinces, 75,000 enemies were defeated. The Jews were victorious, yet none took plunder, for they fought for life, not for greed. 3 days of mourning turned into 3 days of feasting. Esther and Mordecai established the Feast of Purim, so that each year the people would remember. The day Haman cast lots to choose death for the Jewish people became the day they found life, and it has since been remembered as Purim, the day the lot was reversed. From an orphan girl, Esther became a queen, and then the deliverer of her entire people. What is strange is that throughout the whole story, the name of the Lord is never mentioned, yet his invisible hand is present in every link of the chain. Mordecai overhearing the plot, the king happening to lose sleep, the chronicles happening to be read at just the right place, Esther happening to be chosen. None of it was by chance. That story leaves behind a reminder. There are times when you may think yourself insignificant, like Mordecai when he received no reward, or Esther when she could only remain silent. But it is precisely such moments that become the pieces setting the stage for a great turning point. At times, you are placed in a position, in a circumstance, not by accident. Perhaps it is indeed for such a time as this. And if you dare to rise, dare to speak, destiny, not only yours, but that of many others, will be turned. By the way, if you find these videos meaningful or worth watching, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us bring God's Word to more people through powerful animation.